Jack Mercer sat in the cockpit of his ship, the Perseverance, staring at the cold, empty void of space. He was alone, as always. The hum of the ship's engines was a comforting sound, but the silence outside was unsettling. His mission wasn't glamorous. He was just another ex-Marine turned salvage hunter, picking up scraps from abandoned space stations and derelict ships. It didn't pay much, but it kept him alive. Today was different. A new signal had appeared on his radar. It was faint at first, just a ghostly whisper in the vast emptiness of space. But as Jack fine-tuned his systems, it became louder, clearer. The signal was coming from Vanguard Station, an old military outpost that had been abandoned for years. Jack knew about Vanguard Station. It had once been a key military asset before everything went silent. Rumors swirled around the station's fall, something about an experiment gone wrong. But no one ever spoke about it openly. No one ever dared to visit. He squinted at the screen in front of him, his brow furrowing. The signal was clearly not just static. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was trying to make contact. The message was encrypted, but Jack had experience with hacking old comm systems. He plugged in his decrypting software, his fingers moving quickly across the console. Within moments, the screen flickered, and a line of text appeared. They never left. They're still here. Jack's stomach dropped. He read the words again, but they didn't make sense. Who was still there? And why were they sending out this message now, after all these years of silence? A sinking feeling washed over him. This was not a routine salvage mission. This was something else. The signal kept repeating. They never left. Jack sat back in his seat, his mind racing. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. The station had been abandoned long ago. No one had ventured there, not even scavengers. The military had locked it down, and over time, it had simply faded from memory. But now, after all this time, something wanted to be found. Something was still there, and it was calling to him. He glanced at the star map. Vanguard Station was located in the dark zone of the system, a place where few ships dared to go. It was off the regular trade routes, isolated and surrounded by an asteroid field that made navigation tricky. Jack had been out here before, but the dangerous isolation always made him uneasy. Yet the pull of the unknown was too strong to ignore. He activated the ship's thrusters and made the course adjustment. The decision was made. He was going to Vanguard Station. As the Perseverance sliced through the blackness of space, Jack checked his gear, mentally preparing himself for whatever he would find. He was no stranger to danger. After all, he had survived years of combat, seen things that would make most people's blood run cold. But this felt different. This wasn't some random piece of junk waiting to be scavenged. Something was off about Vanguard Station. Something was still alive there. His mind wandered back to the message. They never left. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was it? Who was still on the station after all these years? Could it be the crew? Had they left some kind of distress signal behind, hoping for rescue? Jack doubted it. The military didn't leave people behind. If Vanguard Station had been abandoned, there was a reason. There had to be. The station slowly came into view, its silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of the black void. Jack's eyes narrowed as he adjusted the ship's course. Vanguard Station looked like a ghost, floating in space, its exterior covered in grime and the signs of neglect. But there was something else. There were lights, flickering lights, coming from inside the station. That didn't make sense. The station had been without power for years. There shouldn't have been any lights. As Jack approached the station, he switched his ship's communications to the emergency channel. The same encrypted signal was still coming through. But this time, something else appeared on his console. It was a visual feed, static, but there was a face behind it. A face that Jack couldn't quite make out, blurred by the distortion. He leaned closer to the screen, his heart beginning to race. The face was pale, drawn, and there was something unnervingly familiar about it. Was it human? He couldn't be sure. Then, the voice came through, barely audible, distorted by the poor transmission. "Please, help." The words sent a chill through Jack. His pulse quickened. He tried to adjust the frequency, to make the signal clearer. The voice became stronger, more desperate. "They're watching. They're not what they seem." A loud crackle of static filled the room, and the signal abruptly cut off. The screen went black. Jack stared at the monitor, his mind spinning. The urgency in the voice, the words it had spoken, they didn't make sense. Who was watching? Who were they? And what wasn't what they seemed? He shook his head, trying to clear the haze of uncertainty. One thing was clear now. Vanguard Station wasn't just some abandoned outpost. It was haunted by something more than ghosts. Something alive, something dangerous. Jack's gut told him to turn around, to head back to safer parts of space, but his curiosity, his need to understand what had happened here, kept him moving forward. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, bringing it into docking range with Vanguard Station's decaying airlock. As he approached, the station's systems began to activate. Lights flickered on, alarms began to blare, and the airlock doors creaked open. Jack hesitated for a moment, gripping the armrests of his seat. What was waiting for him inside? Who was still here? And more importantly, why had they reached out to him? The ship settled into position, and the airlock clicked. The door slowly began to open. The dark unknown lay ahead. And Jack knew one thing for sure. The moment he stepped out of the ship, everything would change. He grabbed his gear, his breath steadying. He was ready to face whatever was waiting for him. But as he took his first step toward the airlock, the message from the station echoed in his mind once more. They never left. The door slid open, and the silence of the station greeted him like an old friend. But the danger wasn't in the silence. It was in the shadows. And as Jack Mercer stepped into the dark heart of Vanguard Station, he knew this was just the beginning. Jack Mercer's boots made a soft, metallic thud as he stepped out of the Perseverance and onto the cold floor of Vanguard Station. The air was stale, thick with the smell of decay and old machinery, and there was a slight vibration beneath his feet, a reminder that this station, once a marvel of human engineering, was now dying. Slowly but surely. The faint flicker of lights from the station's decaying power grid barely illuminated the path ahead, casting long shadows that stretched eerily along the walls. It felt like walking through a tomb. The first thing Jack noticed was the silence. It was absolute. Not a sound from the comms, not a hum from the machinery, not even the faintest echo of wind or motion. It was as if the whole station had been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone to finally step inside. Jack's hand instinctively went to the weapon on his side, a standard-issue sidearm, just in case. He wasn't foolish enough to think he was safe here, not after hearing that strange, distorted voice through the comms. "They're watching." The words replayed in his mind, an unsettling warning. The doors to the station slowly closed behind him with a quiet mechanical hiss, sealing him inside. He was alone, except for whatever or whoever was still lurking within. He took a steadying breath and moved forward, keeping his senses alert. His steps echoed louder than he expected, and the oppressive silence seemed to swallow the sound as quickly as it was made. He checked his handheld scanner, the only source of information he had on the station's layout. According to the maps, Vanguard Station had been built as a high-security military outpost designed to house hundreds of personnel. But now, it was a ghost station. The few systems still functional indicated only minimal power was being drawn from the main reactor, enough to keep the lights on but not enough for anything major. It was abandoned, or so Jack thought. Yet the message, the eerie presence, something was off. He followed the dimly lit hallway, his flashlight casting long shadows as it swept across old, rusted walls. The walls were lined with strange markings, alien symbols, some of which Jack recognized from his military training. They were symbols of a language used by the Silurian race, a highly secretive alien species humanity had encountered years ago. It was a race that had been rumored to have close ties with humanity, but official contact had ended abruptly. Rumors suggested that some form of joint military research had been carried out between the Silurians and Earth's military, though details were classified. But there was something else here. These markings were not like the standard ones he had seen. They were erratic, almost like someone had hastily scrawled them, as if in a hurry. Fear, perhaps, or desperation. Jack's eyes narrowed as he walked past the symbols. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He reached the first set of blast doors, sealed shut, as expected. But there was something strange about this part of the station. The air felt thick, almost as if something invisible was pressing against him. He looked up to see a strange glowing light leaking from underneath the doors. It wasn't the station's lights. This light was unnatural, like it was pulsing. Jack didn't hesitate. He needed answers. The door had a security panel next to it. Jack approached it, quickly pulling out his datapad. With a few quick commands, he bypassed the lock. The door hissed open. The room beyond was large, with what looked like abandoned laboratory equipment scattered around. Old glass containers, broken tools, and discarded research papers littered the floor. But what caught Jack's eye wasn't the mess. It was what was in the center of the room. At the center of the chamber stood a tall, frozen figure encased in what appeared to be some sort of stasis field. The figure was humanoid, but it had alien features. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of terror. The creature was suspended in some kind of thick, gel-like substance that looked like it had been designed to preserve it. Jack approached cautiously. This was no ordinary alien. This was one of the hybrids, the very soldiers that Vanguard Station's military program had been working on. The mixture of human and alien DNA had been meant to create super soldiers capable of withstanding extreme conditions and leading mankind's push into the stars. But something had gone wrong. These experiments had been shut down years ago, and this creature, it was the proof of how badly it had gone wrong. Jack's stomach churned as he studied the hybrid. He didn't need to be told that the creature was alive, though barely. The eyes were wide, the skin stretched thin, and though it looked frozen in time, Jack felt a strange pulse emanating from it, like the creature was still trying to break free. Suddenly, a flicker caught his attention. The stasis chamber began to glow, the light growing more intense. Jack stepped back, instinctively drawing his weapon. Something was happening. The air seemed to crackle, charged with energy. The hybrid's chest shuddered. Then, a sharp click. The creature's hand moved slightly. It was awakening. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He knew this was a dangerous situation. The hybrid's activation could signal more danger coming from other parts of the station. But what was even more alarming was the realization that this hybrid might have been sentient, or worse, aware of its past, aware of what had happened to it. Before Jack could react, a soft buzzing sound came from the control panel in the corner. He whirled around, his pulse racing. There on the screen was a new message flashing in bold red letters. "They are awake." Then, the screen went black. The lights in the room flickered again, and suddenly, the entire station seemed to tremble. The buzzing from the stasis chamber intensified, and with a sickening crack, the alien hybrid's eyes snapped open, glowing bright red. Jack instinctively backed away, his heart hammering in his chest. What the hell have I unleashed? Just then, the blast doors he had passed through earlier began to creak. Something was moving on the other side. Not one, but several shuffling noises. He could hear the unmistakable sound of claws scraping along the metal floor, accompanied by guttural growls. They weren't alone anymore. The hybrids were coming. And they weren't the only thing to wake up. Jack realized, with a jolt of terror, that the station's deepest secrets were about to be exposed. But as the shadows in the hallway lengthened, Jack also understood one chilling fact. This wasn't just about the hybrids anymore. Vanguard Station had been the site of something far more dangerous, something even the hybrids might fear. The countdown to whatever came next had already started. The station's secrets were about to be unveiled, and Jack Mercer was going to learn them the hard way. Jack Mercer's pulse was racing, his breath shallow as the guttural growls echoed through the station's dark, abandoned hallways. The hybrids, those terrifying super soldiers created from human and alien DNA, were waking up. The first one, still frozen in its stasis chamber, now had its eyes wide open, glowing with an unsettling red light. The low sound of scraping claws and hissing breaths filled the space around him. The walls of the station seemed to groan, as if the very structure was reacting to the chaos that had begun. Jack didn't have much time. The station, which had once been a military facility, was now a ticking time bomb, and he was standing in its heart. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. But the cold, metallic clink of the hybrid's chains, the ones holding it in place, was unmistakable. The creature was stirring. It was alive. And it wasn't the only one. The air was thick with an unnatural tension, as though the station itself was bracing for something. Jack backed up slowly, his eyes flicking toward the hallway, the source of the terrifying sounds that were growing louder by the second. The hybrid, if that's even what it could still be called, was moving. Its frozen form seemed to shift. First the hand, then its shoulders, the gel-like substance it was encased in beginning to break apart. Jack's heart skipped a beat as the creature's eyes locked onto him. It didn't just stare, it understood him. Its pupils narrowed. There was a knowing in those eyes, a strange kind of intelligence. And then it spoke. In a voice distorted and raspy, the hybrid let out a low growl. "You should not have come here, human." Jack froze. The voice sounded almost familiar, like the one from the comms earlier, the one that had warned him. But this wasn't a normal warning. This was a threat. His instincts screamed at him to run, to leave the station and get as far away as possible, but something kept him rooted to the spot. The hybrid, despite its terrifying appearance, wasn't rushing to attack. It was calculating, its movements deliberate, as if it were waiting for something. The claws on the floor were getting louder now, and the shuffling noises from the hallway became clearer. Jack's senses were overloaded. Every inch of the station seemed to be coming to life. From the walls to the floors, to the creatures lurking in the shadows, it was like something had been waiting for him to step foot here all along. Suddenly, a crackling noise came from the comms, and Jack's device lit up with a new message. It was another encrypted signal, the same one he had received earlier, but this time it was much clearer. The words on the screen were chilling. "The hybrids are only the beginning. What was done here was never meant to be stopped. And now, you are part of it." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. He turned, his eyes darting around the room, looking for any sign of where the message had come from. But the walls remained silent. He looked back at the hybrid, its body now fully exposed from the stasis field, its limbs stretching and flexing, its alien features becoming even more unsettling in the dim light. But it was its eyes, the glowing red eyes, that held his attention. They were too intelligent, too aware, for something that was supposed to be a failed experiment. The hybrid's voice broke through his thoughts again. "We were made for war, but we were left to die here. The truth of this station, its real purpose, is buried deep, beyond your understanding. But now you'll see it for yourself." Jack's mind raced. The station, the hybrids, the experiments, they were all connected. The real purpose of Vanguard Station wasn't just about creating super soldiers. It wasn't just about combining human and alien DNA. The hybrids themselves were test subjects, but there was something much larger at play here. The growls from the hallway intensified as more of the hybrids approached. He needed to act. He could feel the cold sweat beginning to form on the back of his neck. His fingers hovered over his weapon, but he couldn't shake the feeling that shooting his way out of here wouldn't be enough. He had to find out what had really happened to Vanguard Station. And fast. Suddenly, the lights flickered again. The station's emergency systems began to activate with a loud hum, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to shake slightly. The hybrid in front of him looked past him, its eyes widening as it tilted its head, as if it had heard something Jack hadn't. Then, through the murk of the station, he heard it, a distant whirring noise, followed by a mechanical clunk. It sounded like a door opening. Jack turned sharply. In the distance, the faint outline of another blast door was sliding open, slowly but steadily. He didn't know what was behind it, but he had a sick feeling in his gut that whatever it was worse than the creatures that were already closing in on him. The hybrid growled again, its voice low and threatening. "They're coming." Jack's gaze snapped back to the hybrid. It wasn't just talking about the hybrids. There was something else, a deeper, more terrifying presence in the station. Before Jack could respond, a sharp screech filled the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal. A mechanical door at the far end of the corridor slid open, revealing a dark figure emerging from the shadows. It was human, but not quite. The person, or thing, was wearing a torn military uniform, their face obscured by a dark mask. And then, as if on cue, the hybrids in the room turned, silent and still, as the figure stepped into the dim light. Jack's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a survivor. This wasn't just a rescuer. This was the real reason Vanguard Station had been abandoned. The hybrids were only part of the plan. The humans involved in this experiment, they were still here. The figure spoke, and Jack's stomach twisted with the realization that this was no accident, no simple failed military operation. This was something far more sinister. "You shouldn't have come here. We weren't supposed to be found." Jack's world began to shift, the ground beneath him spinning with the terrifying implications of those words. The hybrids, the station, the mysterious figure, it was all tied to something bigger, something that had never been meant to be uncovered. And now, Jack was in the middle of it. As the dark figure advanced toward him, Jack knew there was no turning back. The truth about Vanguard Station was out there. And soon, he would learn just how terrifying the truth really was. Jack Mercer's breath came in sharp, quick bursts as he watched the figure step closer, each footfall echoing in the vast, dimly lit hallway of Vanguard Station. The hybrid creatures, silent now, eerily still, watched with cold, calculating eyes. For a moment, it felt like everything in the station had stopped, as though the very air held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The figure before him was no ordinary survivor. Jack could feel it, that palpable sense of wrongness. The person, or whatever it was, moved with an unnatural calm, their mask obscuring any hint of emotion or identity. The military uniform they wore was torn, burnt at the edges, and stained with something dark and viscous. But it wasn't the clothes that made Jack uneasy. It was the aura of command the figure exuded, a silent authority that made the hybrid creatures defer, that made the station itself seem to bend around them. Jack instinctively took a step back, his hand still clutching the gun at his side, though he had no illusions it would help him now. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. The hybrid had spoken. "They're coming." But it hadn't been referring to more of its kind. It was clear now that whatever this person was, they were part of something far bigger. Vanguard Station wasn't just the site of failed experiments. It was ground zero for something much darker, a conspiracy that went far beyond even the terrifying hybrid creatures. The figure came to a stop about 10 feet in front of Jack, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was thick, and Jack's heart was pounding in his chest as he waited for the inevitable. The hybrid nearest to him shifted slightly, its claws scraping the metal floor, and that was enough to break the tension. The figure spoke, their voice low and rasping, barely more than a whisper, but the weight of the words hit Jack like a blow. "You don't understand yet, do you? You're already too deep. Jack's mouth was dry, his throat tight. The voice seemed to carry with it the weight of years, decades perhaps. A voice that had heard and seen too much, a voice that had lived through something terrible. The figure continued, their tone cold but laced with something else. Guilt, regret. This station was never meant to be abandoned. It was meant to be a fortress, a place where humanity would make its final stand. Jack frowned, trying to process the words. Final stand. This wasn't some military station with routine experiments. There was something else going on here, something that the military had kept hidden, something they didn't want anyone to know. The figure took a slow step forward, and Jack instinctively raised his gun. But the figure didn't flinch. In fact, they seemed to welcome the gesture with a grim smile that Jack could only see faintly behind their mask. "You're too late, Mercer," they said, using his last name with an unsettling familiarity. "It's already begun." Before Jack could ask what they meant, the figure raised one gloved hand, and the lights in the hallway flickered, then brightened to an almost painful intensity. Jack shielded his eyes, squinting against the sudden brightness, and when he looked back, the figure had moved. The hybrid nearest to Jack suddenly lunged forward with blinding speed, but Jack was quicker. He fired, twice, the shots ringing out in quick succession. The creature stumbled back, smoke rising from the burns on its chest. It didn't fall. It didn't even scream. It simply roared in rage and pain, its glowing eyes turning from Jack to the figure behind him. The tension in the air grew even thicker. Jack's breath was ragged, his finger tight on the trigger, but the hybrid was now ignoring him. It was focused on the figure in front of it, the figure that seemed to control it. "Stay down." The figure's voice was a command, no hint of hesitation. And just like that, the hybrid stopped in its tracks. It froze, its claws, poised to strike, lowered to the ground. And for a moment, Jack thought he had imagined the entire thing. But the creature was obeying. The figure's authority over it was undeniable. The figure finally spoke again, this time directly to Jack, their voice softer but more chilling than before. "You think you're just here to salvage what's left of this station, don't you? You think it's just an abandoned outpost to explore, something to claim for your own gain. But the truth, Mercer, is that this station was never abandoned. It was sealed away, locked down for a reason." Jack felt his stomach churn. The figure's words were beginning to paint a picture, one that was far more disturbing than he could have imagined. This wasn't just about some secret military experiments with alien DNA or super soldiers. No, Vanguard Station had been the site of something far worse, something far more monstrous than he could grasp. Asterisk, asterisk, the hybrids. They're not failures, Mercer. They're protectors. Jack's mind raced. Protectors? How could creatures like this be protectors? They were monstrous, the very definition of nightmares come to life. The figure seemed to read his thoughts, their mask tilting slightly as if amused. "You don't understand. They were created to guard something far more dangerous than themselves. Vanguard Station isn't just a military base. It's the containment facility for something we can't control. Something we never should have tried to control." Before Jack could respond, the air around them seemed to shift again. The entire station rumbled beneath them, the lights flickering as if a power surge was ripping through the station. Then, without warning, the blast doors at the far end of the hallway slammed shut. A low, eerie hum filled the air, the sound of something awakening. The figure took a step back, their posture stiffening. The hybrid that had been standing silently at attention moved toward the newly sealed door, its eyes glowing with anticipation. Jack's grip on his weapon tightened as he turned to face the door. What had been locked behind it? The figure answered his unspoken question, their voice filled with an almost sorrowful tone. "It's too late, Mercer. The containment is failing. Whatever was meant to stay locked away here, it's breaking free." The air around Jack seemed to thicken, and a cold, bitter wind began to blow through the hallways, as if something incredibly powerful had just awakened deep within the station. In that moment, Jack knew he was no longer just in danger from the hybrids. There was something much worse coming. And Vanguard Station, the place that had once been a military outpost, had become the tomb for something ancient, terrifying, and unstoppable. The hybrids, the figure, and the hidden secrets of the station had all been guarding the true horror, the one thing that had never been meant to be unleashed. And now, it was coming for them all. The doors rattled, the hum rising in intensity, and Jack Mercer realized, with a sinking feeling, that there was no escaping the nightmare that had been waiting in the darkness. The true horror of Vanguard Station was finally breaking free.